Back on the record, this is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, and the prosecutors are present as well. The jury is outside the courtroom at this time. What do you want to do for purposes of making a record as to the demonstrative exhibit P-TR-1095? Are you asking to take any action with respect to that?
No, Your Honor, I was not. If the court feels it's better, we can admit it. I took it back, but.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to admit it. I'm just asking whether you wanted us to make a record of it. Does the defense want us to keep that, or do you care? It was not admitted. It was used as a demonstrative exhibit.
I think it's probably safer to keep it for the court record, Judge.
Okay. All right, let's mark it as a court trial exhibit, okay? So we're up to what, 11? 12? Okay, number 12. Let's mark it as court trial exhibit number 12, C-TR-12. All right, let's bring the jury in, please.
Here, away from the other stuff.
The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Please be seated, everyone. Welcome back, members of the jury. Mr. Edson, please call your next witness.
People call Carol Crow. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath? You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names.
My name is Carol Crow, C-A-R-O-L-C-R-O-W-E.
Mr. Edson, you may proceed with your direct examination.
Thank you. Ms. Crow, if I could just have you kind of put that microphone up a little bit.
Sure.
There you go. Can you tell us your occupation, please?
I'm a forensic scientist, laboratory agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Forensic Services Division in our Denver laboratory.
Can you tell the jury about your background, specifically your educational background, please?
I graduated in 1995 from Metropolitan State College of Denver with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry with an emphasis in criminalistics. Criminalistics is another term for forensic science.
The Colorado Bureau of Investigation, is that sometimes also called CBI?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what exactly are your duties with the Colorado Bureau of Investigations?
I'm assigned to the laboratory, and at the current time I conduct analysis on evidence items from fire scenes for ignitable liquid residues, and I also analyze evidence for gunshot residue.
And I'm going to be asking you some questions related to gunshot residue analysis. First of all, have you received any specific training in your current position related to gunshot residue analysis?
Yes.
Can you tell that for the jury, please?
I received training in the analysis of gunshot residue at the CBI laboratory from other agents who have been performing that type of analysis. I've also received training from the manufacturer of the instruments that we use, which is a scanning electron microscope with an energy dispersive spectrometer. They've trained me on the operation and maintenance of those instruments. I have attended scanning, which is a conference for microanalysis, and at both of those times that I participated, I also attended a short course, a one-day short course regarding the use of the scanning electron microscope in forensic science. I've attended the Federal Bureau of Investigation Gunshot Residue Symposium in 2005. Prior to beginning casework and on a routine basis, I am proficiency tested to demonstrate that I am still proficient to do that type of analysis.
Is that an ongoing type of testing?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain for the jury about that as far as when you were last went through training and things of that sort?
In regards to the proficiency testing, it has been nearly every year when they have been available. The last time I conducted and successfully completed a proficiency test in gunshot residue was in 2014. The trainings have been throughout my time at CBI, initially with those agents at the CBI laboratory, and then in 2003 and 2007 I attended the scanning conference, and the FBI symposium was in 2005.
Are you a member of or otherwise participate in any sort of professional affiliation groups associated specifically with gunshot residue analysis?
Yes, I'm a member of the International Association of Microanalysis. I'm recently a member of the American Society of Trace Evidence Examiners, and I have been a member of the International Scientific Working Group for Gunshot Residue since 2006. And the Scientific Working Group is a gathering of gunshot residue experts from around the world, and we have been working towards standardization of gunshot residue analysis.
How long have you been with CBI?
Just over 19 years.
How many of those 19 years have you been involved in gunshot residue analysis as part of your duties?
Just over 18 years.
Have you previously testified in any courts here in the state of Colorado specific to gunshot residue analysis?
Yes,
How many times as a ballpark?
just over 140 times.
Okay. Does that include counties such as Arapahoe County that you're sitting here today?
Yes, those have all been district courts in the state of Colorado.
Have you previously been qualified as an expert in gunshot residue analysis for any court testimony?
Yes.
Do you have approximate how many times?
I kind of lumped them all together in the over 140 times that I have testified regarding gunshot residue.
Over your career, again, this is another ballpark type of question. How many pieces of evidence have you been requested to analyze related to gunshot residue?
I estimate that I have analyzed approximately 7,000 samples for gunshot residue.
Judge, at this time, I would move for this witness to be qualified as an expert in the area and field of gunshot residue analysis pursuant to Colorado Rule of Evidence 702.
Any additional objection?
No additional objection, Judge.
All right, based on my previous ruling, the court accepts Ms. Kroll as an expert witness in the field of gunshot residue analysis. That's pursuant to Rule 702 of the Colorado Rules of Evidence and the decision in People v. Schreck, S-H-R-E-C-K, 22 Pacific 3rd, 68, Colorado, 2001. Members of the jury, remember the... Can you get that, please? Thank you. Remember the instruction, the limiting instruction, or not limiting, but the instruction I gave you earlier about expert witnesses. I'll read it to you again. You are not bound by the testimony of a witness who testifies as an expert. The credibility of an expert's testimony is to be considered as that of any other witness. You may believe all of an expert witness's testimony, part of it, or none of it. The weight that you give the testimony is entirely your decision. All right, Mr. Edson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. What is gunshot residue?
The term gunshot residue, or sometimes abbreviated GSR, can be a very general term referring to any residues that result from a firearm discharge. I'm looking for particles that arise specifically from the primer component of the ammunition. At the base of a cartridge of ammunition is a circle, and that's the primer cup. And housed in that primer cup is an explosive material, primer. When the firing pin of the gun strikes that primer cup, it causes the primer to explode. And it's that explosion of the primer that sets off the burning of the gunpowder. The burning of the gunpowder creates a great volume of gases and pressure. That's what pushes the bullet out of the gun. Most primers, but not all primers, but most primers that are used in ammunition in the United States have in its ingredients the elements of lead, barium, and antimony. With that discharge of that firearm, those elements are released around that gun, and they may be in a gaseous form in the cloud of gases generated from that firearm discharge. As those gases start to cool, those elements, which include lead, barium, and antimony, may coalesce together, much like raindrops out of a rain cloud, and form discrete particles. These are microscopic particles, and the particles that we are most interested in looking for are particles that would contain all three of those elements of lead, barium, and antimony. That meets the criteria that we've established at CBI as a particle characteristic of gunshot residue.
Do you actually analyze pieces of evidence that are submitted to you by law enforcement agencies for potential gunshot residue?
Yes.
You tell a jury, how do you generally do that?
Well, we receive evidence that may be the gunshot residue collection kit, which are samples that have been taken from an individual person. We can also receive inanimate objects that are requested to be analyzed for gunshot residue. I'll start with the gunshot residue kit that's used to sample an individual. These kits are assembled by an outside company, and they contain collection devices. These collection devices are in a plastic container, and they kind of look like an overgrown thumbtack with a sticky adhesive surface on the top, the flat part of that device. I sometimes refer to those as a stub or collection device. The collection is simply done just by opening that plastic cap and then dabbing that sticky surface onto the person that is being sampled. I use that same type of collection device in the laboratory when I'm sampling an inanimate object as well.
What do you mean by that?
I have a supply of those collection devices at the laboratory, and when there's a request to analyze an inanimate object for gunshot residue, I will use one of those collection devices and just dab on the surfaces of that inanimate object. And then it's that collection device that I'm analyzing.
I'm going to read a rather lengthy scientific statement here, and you tell me if you recognize it. What is a scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive spectrometer? Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, tell me what that is.
Those are actually two instruments that are hooked in tandem. The first part, the scanning electron microscope, is a high-powered electronic microscope capable of magnifying to a much greater degree than the light microscope you might be familiar with from high school biology. I can readily magnify the surface of these collection devices or anything, magnify easily 10,000x, whereas a light microscope 400 to 500 times magnification is pretty good. So that's the first part of the instrument that I'm using. And that microscope is used to search the surface of that collection device for particles that meet a certain criteria that I've entered into the software. The second instrument, the energy dispersive spectrometer, is an instrument that can provide elemental information about what I'm looking at under the microscope. So in the analysis for gunshot residue, the scanning electron microscope searches back and forth across that surface of the stub. When it finds a particle that meets a certain criteria that I've entered into the software, it'll pause and the energy dispersive spectrometer will turn on, obtain information about the elements that are present in that particle. It'll save all that information, snap a picture of certain types of particles, and save all that into a database, and then move on and continue its search.
Is both the microscope, as you just described, and that spectrometer, are they both scientific instruments?
Yes,
Do they work in tandem with one another?
yes.
I'm going to draw your attention to January of 2013. My first question is, were you working with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in January 2013?
Yes.
were you still working in the lab, one of your jobs being the analysis of gunshot residue from law enforcement items that are sent in?
Yes.
Just kind of a background question. CBI, do they accept, including yourself, do you accept items from various law enforcement agencies throughout the state of Colorado
Yes, we do.
for different types of analysis?
Yes.
So roughly January 16th, 2013, did you receive any type of items from the Aurora Police Department specific to the events of July 20th, 2012 relating to the shooting at the Aurora Century 16 Theater?
Yes, I did.
What did you receive in your lab?
I received for gunshot residue analysis 3 items. One was a gunshot residue kit that was sampled from an individual, and I also received 2 inanimate objects. One was described as a gas mask, and the other was gloves.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Ma'am, I've placed before you 3 different items. First, I'd like to ask you about, all 3 of these have already been admitted into evidence. The first is People's Exhibit 383. Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is that from your perspective?
This is the gunshot residue collection kit from James Holmes that I analyzed.
How do you know that's the one you analyzed?
It bears the markings on all the layers, including the kit itself. It has the CBI case number, the item number, the date, and my initials where I marked it. The seal that I made to reseal it after I finished analysis also bears my initials and the date. The outer packaging, in addition to bearing the handwritten CBI case number, item number, date, and initials on the seal, also has a CBI tag on it with the barcode.
So I want to talk colors here for a moment. I see both red tape and blue tape. Do you know what the difference are between those two?
I know that the blue tape is from the CBI laboratory system because it's printed with CBI laboratory on it.
Is it common for CBI to use a blue tape to kind of differentiate itself from other tapes used in evidence?
It is. That is the tape that we are supplied and that we use within the laboratory.
That particular GSR kit, again, we've heard some testimony already, but who does that refer to?
This refers, it was indicated that it was used to sample James Holmes.
Okay. So when you receive that particular item in for sampling, what do you do with it?
First I open it, and as I open it, I'm examining the seals and making notations regarding the packaging and the condition of the seals. When I open the inner kit, the inner envelope, then I remove those sampling devices in their little plastic containers, and eventually I remove the collection device itself from that plastic container and place it into the scanning electron microscope so that I can analyze it.
In fact, did you do that in this case?
Yes.
Were you able, based on your expert opinion and analysis, to come up with any sort of results related to gunshot residue?
Yes.
What were those results?
Analysis of this gunshot residue kit disclosed the presence of particles characteristic of gunshot residue.
What does that mean?
It means that this individual may have discharged a firearm, may have been in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged, or may have come in contact with something that had gunshot residue on it. I cannot tell which one of those 3 explanations is the actual reason or is the more likely or more probable. All I can say is that it's one of those 3.
I've also placed behind you now 2 additional items of evidence. Let's start with the larger of the 2. It should be People's Exhibit 669.
Yes.
Okay, do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
First of all, fair to say it's in a different set of packaging than when you initially received it?
Yes.
Okay. Aside from the different set of packaging, how do you recognize People's Exhibit 669?
When I examined this item, I added this zip tie, this blue zip tie, and that's where I wrote my identifying marks. So it has the CBI case number, the CBI item number, the date, and my initials attached directly to the item.
Why do you use a zip tie like that?
In this case, it was easier to mark it that way. Oftentimes, I'll just use a Sharpie and we'll be able to mark directly on the item. In this case, I felt that the zip tie was a better choice.
And just so we're all on the same page, generally, what does this piece of evidence appear to be?
A gas mask.
In fact, did you conduct analysis of this particular piece of evidence for gunshot residue?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive any sort of results or opinions related to that?
I did.
Explain for the jury, please.
The sampling that I took from this disclosed the presence of particles characteristic of gunshot residue.
Again, what does that mean?
It means that this item, this gas mask, was either in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged or it came in contact with something that had gunshot residue on it.
The third item there behind you should be People's Exhibits 671.
Yes,
Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
What is that exhibit?
This is a pair of gloves.
Did you have any sort of contact with those gloves as far as gunshot residue analysis?
I did. I sampled them for gunshot residue analysis.
You talked about this earlier, but describe how you sampled the gloves.
The gloves, I also took one of those gunshot residue or scanning electron microscope collection devices from our supply, and I just simply dabbed the surfaces on both gloves using one of those sampling devices, and I sampled the backs of the gloves as well as the palms.
And were you able to discern any sort of results or opinion related to gunshot residue for People's Exhibit 671, which are the gloves?
Yes.
Explain that for the jury, please.
Analysis of the sampling of these gloves disclosed the presence of particles characteristic of gunshot residue.
And what does that mean?
These gloves were either in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged, or they came in contact with something that had gunshot residue on them.
When did you actually conduct your analysis of these items?
I started by opening the packaging on January 16th of 2013. I finished the analysis on, I believe it was January 28th of 2013, and the report was finalized and issued on January 30th of 2013.
So what I'd like to ask you now is describe for the jury, if you would please, some of the controls you put in place at your lab to make sure that these items didn't come in contact with something else you may have looked at the day before and transferred any GSR. Describe that for the jury.
First of all, we use what can be termed a negative control or a blank. And this is a stub or a collection device that has not been used to sample anything. It is carried through the same process that the sampling devices from the evidence goes through. And with the gunshot residue kit, there is a control stub that is included in that. So on the run that I had prepared on the scanning electron microscope for the kit from Mr. Holmes, that blank from within the kit was also analyzed alongside. And that blank allows me to provide information about my environment in the laboratory. If the analysis of the samples from the individual show that there is gunshot residue particles present, but the blank does not, I have confidence that my environment did not provide those gunshot residue particles that are on the subject's samples. I did the same thing with the samples that I took from the glove and the gas mask. I just used one of the sampling devices from our supply at the laboratory. That's one of the controls that we use. Another control is a positive control. And in the course of setting up the instrument, I will set the instrument so that it'll start, the very first in the sequence will be a known gunshot residue area. And the last sample that is analyzed in that sequence will be a known gunshot residue area. That provides me with confidence that if the instrument can find gunshot residue at the start and it can still find it at the end, then I'm confident it can find it in the middle. And that primarily serves for those instances where my analysis does not disclose the presence of any particles characteristic of gunshot residue. I can be assured that this instrument setting was capable of finding gunshot residue particles. The third control that we use is the analysis of a known material, and we use copper. So before the first analysis in the sequence and after every sample that is analyzed in that sequence, the instrument will drive to a copper standard, and it will acquire information on that copper, and it is to demonstrate that it is capable and stable of finding and properly identifying the element that is present in that analysis.
Did you follow those procedures in this case related to these particular 3 items of evidence?
Yes.
Judge, can I have one moment, please?
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
Cross-examination, Mr. King.
Good afternoon.
I don't have a lot for you, ma'am. I just have a few questions about the nature of gunshot residue itself or particles associated with that. And then I have just a couple questions about the testing in this case and the import of that testing in this case, if I may. You said that gunshot residue, that there are 3 conclusions you're able to draw as an analyst are that the one that a person was in the vicinity of a firearm that was discharged, right?
That's correct. That's one of the 3 explanations. I really view it as one conclusion that has 3 parts to it, because I cannot say which one of those 3 is the most likely.
Right. And so what you do is you can find the gunshot residue part or particles consistent with gunshot residue. You just can't exactly attribute where the gunshot residue came from, and that's why you have those 3 categories. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
And the 3 categories, again, are that the person either discharged a firearm themselves, right?
That's correct.
That they were in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged, correct?
Yes.
Or that they touched a firearm that had gunshot residue on it or some other object that had gunshot residue on it.
Yes.
And that would be what's called transfer. Fair to
Yes.
say?
Yes.
And as you said, gunshot residue is formed initially in a gaseous form. Is that right?
It is.
And it's caused due to the pressure and the heat of the gunpowder in a cartridge exploding, essentially, right?
That's part of the mechanism. Including the primer is also a pretty high heat explosion as well and can contribute to that vaporization.
It's very high heat, correct?
Yes, and I cannot tell you exactly how high, but it is hot.
And so, as you said, what happens is the firing pin or the hammer strikes the primer, which ignites, and that ignites the rest of the gunpowder in the cartridge, which then propels the bullet out of the muzzle of the gun, correct?
Yes.
And in the course of doing that, there's this gaseous cloud that's created, for want of a better word.
Yes.
Not necessarily something you can see, but it forms a cloud in an area around it. Some of it comes out the rear of the firearm, fair to say?
Yes.
Some of it can come out the side of the firearm if there's an ejection port on the side.
Yes.
And so if anything that's within a 3, 2, 3, maybe even as much as a 6-foot radius, when that gas cloud cools, the barium, antimony, and lead elements form individual particles. They congeal into individual particles that form on different surfaces. Fair to say?
They may. They're probably more likely forming in that cloud of gases and settling out.
Settling down like a snowflake or something like that.
Yes.
And when that happens, that can easily be transferred. Like you said, it can be wiped off from one substance to another. It doesn't stick necessarily to the surface, correct?
That's correct.
Also, in addition, there's a great deal of that residue which can come out the muzzle of the gun, accompanying the bullet and whatever else is projected out the front of the weapon, correct?
Yes,
And that can continue downrange for some distance, maybe as much as 60 feet or so.
that's correct.
And you would agree with me that if a firearm was discharged out of doors, for example, where there was wind, there may be less of a chance of gunpowder residue particles forming. They may get blown away, or maybe less likely that they form.
Yes, we don't really know whether it would be a reduced formation or if they're just dissipated further with environmental factors such as wind.
When you're in an enclosed space, there's more of a likelihood that those particles would form, correct?
Yes.
Or that they would be
With some-
depositive.
Both, I think. Yes, I think you're right.
Now, at the CBI, what you do is you have this high-tech gizmo, that's what I'm going to call it because I can't pronounce it, a scanning electron microscope that automatically scans the surface that you program it to scan, correct?
That's correct.
And it identifies certain particles that it believes are consistent with the three elements of barium, antimony, and lead.
Yes, it will actually categorize whatever particles that it has obtained elemental composition on. It will categorize each of those and provide me with a table of all the particles that it has classified.
Now, you don't rely entirely on that instrument in order to form your conclusions, do you?
I do, in the sense that that's the only instrument that I'm using is the scanning electron microscope with the energy dispersive spectrometer. However, I do not rely solely on the automated function of that. I will return and confirm particles in a relocation process before I will report a particle characteristic as gunshot residue. I think that's might have been what you were getting at.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Thank you. And you do that with the other instrument you use to do that are your two eyeballs, right? And you actually look at the particles yourself through the microscope and see what you think they are.
Yes, that is part of it. Visually, I can take a look at that particle and obtain more information on it, but also I have the opportunity when I relocate it manually to dwell on that particle for a longer period of time. The automated analysis is set up to try to be as efficient as possible, and it is a very brief amount of time that acquisition occurs on that particle. And so in relocation, I can sit on that particle and obtain the elemental composition, obtain the data that provides that information for a much longer period.
And as a practical matter, you don't go back and manually confirm every single potentially identified particle, correct? You just do one or two?
That's correct. If the instrument has classified particles as containing lead, barium, and antimony, I will relocate particles until I have one or two that are confirmed as containing lead, barium, and antimony.
So my point here is, and I'm not trying to be obtuse, but my point is that you at the CBI don't conduct a quantitative analysis of gunshot residue particles. In other words, you don't say, well, this piece of evidence has 1,000 and this piece of evidence has 2, and so this one was closer, or you're not able to draw any of those kinds of conclusions, are you?
That is correct. We do a qualitative analysis, so I can determine whether or not there's particles detected that contain lead, barium, and antimony. But I do not do a true quantitative. Although my instrument will provide me with the number of particles that it classified as containing lead, barium, and antimony in combination, I do not draw any conclusions based on the number of particles that are characteristic of gunshot residue. And so we do not go back and relocate every particle that the instrument has classified as lead, barium, and antimony. Great.
And I just have a few more questions, and the purpose of these questions is to try to, this is all fascinating stuff, but I want to try to relate how the significance of your findings to this case, okay? There are a number of things, well, gunshot residue, as you said, you can tell It's either there or it's not, right?
That's correct.
And if it's there, you draw one of the three conclusions that, that we mentioned before.
I report the composite of those three.
And really, you're not able to draw any other conclusions from that, are you?
That's correct.
You can't determine how many rounds were fired.
That is correct.
You can't determine the proximity of the weapon to the victim or to the item that you discovered gunshot residue on, correct?
That is correct.
You can't determine the type of weapon that was used, or if more than one weapon was used.
That is correct.
You can't determine the trajectory of the rounds that were used, correct?
That is correct.
You can't determine who pulled the trigger,
That is correct.
nor can you determine what the intentionality or thought process of the person who pulled the trigger was, correct?
That is correct.
May I have one moment, Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, ma'am.
Mr. Edson, do you have any redirect?
No, Judge, thank you.
It looks like the jury has some questions for you, so please give us a moment. Thank you. Would counsel please approach? Okay, the jury has submitted some questions, and I have found that all of them are appropriate under the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law. The first question, and I should tell you that a couple of these are similar. I'm going to ask them the way they've been submitted. If you feel like you've already answered the question, then you can just tell me that, okay? The first question is, how long does GSR last or stay on items?
On inanimate objects, just like on people, the particles characteristic of gunshot residue will be on there until they're removed. With people, we know that most people's activities of daily living, including hand washing and showering, can readily remove those particles. Washing of inanimate objects can also remove most, if not all, particles present on them. However, if they're not washed, those particles, once they're on there, are there until they are removed.
You may have answered the next question already, but I'll ask it and then you tell me if you've answered it or not. How long does GSR last or stay on hands/skin?
Again, that goes back to it's there until it's removed. With people, we are usually washing and other activities of daily living that would provide friction and a source of removal of those particles. So on people, there's kind of a general consensus that those particles are being removed readily within a few hours. However, if the activity is not vigorous, certainly if the activity does not include hand washing or showering, those particles may stay on there for much longer than 4 to 5 hours, maybe much longer than that.
I think you've answered this question, but you tell me if you disagree. How long does GSR remain on a person/inanimate objects? You've answered it.
I think I've answered that, yes.
Right. The next question is, would simply handling a rifle cartridge/bullet or shotgun shell unfired leave gunshot residue?
If it's been, I'll start with the ammunition. If those have not been discharged, then they would only have gunshot residue on them from their proximity is, say, a firing range. So if they were someplace where they were near a firearm discharge, they could get gunshot residue on them, then handling them could transfer that. Firearm, most firearms have been fired. Even in the factory, they are fired as a test before they are shipped out and sold. And so those guns may have gunshot residue particles on them from the very manufacturing location. Did that answer the question?
I believe you did.
Okay.
I think you've answered the next one too. How long does residue last on an object?
Yes.
The next question is, can the results of a GSR test be affected by the length of time from when the item or person was around gunshot residue to the time it was tested?
Yes, depending again on the activity, the actions that item or person were subjected to could reduce the particles to a point where I would not be able to detect them.
The next question is, can gunshot residue get onto a person's skin through clothing, gloves, mask, etc.?
Yes, that's what we would put into that last group. Somebody could be positive because they handled something with gunshot residue on it. So if it is an item such as a garment or a mask or any item that has gunshot residue on it, those particles may transfer onto that individual from that action.
And the last question, did the GSR test done on James Holmes come back with testing positive on all 3 samples, both hands and face, or just on 1 or 2 of the samples?
I can answer that with caution. The 3 samples that were analyzed, the 2 hand samples were positive for particles characteristic of gunshot residue. The face did not. I caution you against drawing any conclusions about the location that particles are found. I don't draw any conclusions because of the transferability of particles. Some gunshot residue particles that may start on my right hand because I swiped it across the surface that has gunshot residue on it, those particles may readily transfer to my left hand because I wring my hands, or to my face because I rub my face. And so I I view a kit from an individual in its entirety, and I will report based on that kit and draw no further conclusions based on the location that those particles are found.
Any follow-up questions, Mr. Edson?
Just briefly, I understand the washing hands, soap and water. What if an individual were just to rub hands together without soap or water? How does that affect transferability, detection, things like that?
I don't have any studies that are specific to just that action. We do know that that transfer can happen back and forth. However, I think it's more of a removal. If I'm also rubbing my hands on my pants or putting my hands in my pockets, though that is a true removal. The hands just back and forth together, it almost seems like I'm just transferring it back and forth, back and forth. There may be some loss just from gravity. That action may dislodge particles and they float off in a way. Like I said, I don't have a specific study to cite regarding that action.
Regarding what you just stated about wiping your hands on clothing, I think you said that was a true removal process. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it can. That can be sufficient action to remove gunshot residue particles.
Okay, let me ask it in the reverse. Individual that does that wipes their hands on clothing or on themselves, maybe they have shorts on and they wipe it on their legs or something. Does that mean automatically that it's going to dissipate the gunshot residue on their hands?
I don't think I can answer that. I don't know that it would.
So you still may find gunshot residue on an individual's hands even with that type of movement?
That's correct.
Last question that I have is, what about hair? If you're testing hands and they somehow are playing with their hair or what have you, does that affect it at all?
It can. Hair can be a place where gunshot residue may be entrapped as well. And there are some labs around the world that will sample the hair follicles for gunshot residue particles. So if the hair is positive and the hands go in the hair, the hands may become positive and vice versa. The hair may be a removing action.
Judge, one moment, please.
Yes.
Nothing further. Thank you, Judge.
Mr. King, do you have any follow-up questions?
You know, ma'am, when 4 jurors ask the same question, it may be a teaching moment for the lawyers. How long does GSR last when it's deposited on the surface? No, withdraw that question. You were asked about unfired cartridges. Could unfired cartridges have gunshot residue on them? And this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the answer to that is they could. It wouldn't come from that cartridge, but it may have been transferred from some other surface.
That is correct. That's what I was trying to get across.
So, for example, if I had a gun with a magazine of bullets in it, and I fired one of the bullets out of the magazine, it's possible that the other bullets that are still in the magazine, though unfired, may then have gunshot residue on them.
It may be possible. I don't know how probable that scenario would be.
But the point is that gunshot residue is very readily transferable from one surface to another. Is that right?
If there's contact made, yes.
In fact, you at one point did a study of police cars, and you found gunshot residue in the back seats of about half of the police cars you tested, right?
Yes, I did.
You were asked about gunshot residue being deposited on skin underneath clothing, and I wanted to make sure I understood your answer about that. Are you saying that if someone is wearing a shirt and they're exposed to in the proximity of where a firearm is fired, that it may deposit the gunshot residue under the shirt on the skin, or would that only happen by transfer?
I missed that question, apparently. And I did not intend for that conclusion to be made that the gunshot residue particles could work their way under. If there was contact, if there was some transferability, they could come underneath that clothing item. But generally, clothing is going to stop the GSR particles, and they'll be on that clothing. Now, if that clothing is removed, those particles may dislodge and end up on the surfaces that were underneath them.
Thank you, ma'am. No other questions.
May this witness be released from our subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection, Mr. King?
Without objection.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Call your next witness, please.
Emily Gibson, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm on a penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
You can put these bags back there behind you. There you go. Or that bag, I should say. All right. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names?
Emily Sullivan Gibson, Emily Gibson.
And can you spell the middle name, Sullivan?
Sullivan.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please tell us what you do for a living, ma'am?
I'm a senior professional research assistant over at the University of Colorado in Mark Delacroix's lab.
Now
It's fancy for lab tech.
Okay.
Sorry.
We heard from a Mark Delacroix here yesterday that talked about a lab involving about 8 people out at the Anschutz Center. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
How long have you worked for Professor Dr. Delacroix?
Almost 12 years.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to pull the microphone closer to your mouth so we can all hear you. Make sure it's right up close to your mouth. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Almost 12 years.
There you go.
What did you do before that?
I was a research technician in a lab back in Georgia.
How long did you do that?
That job was at least 2 years, 3 years.
Tell us a little bit about what it takes to become a lab tech, where you ended up finding yourself in Mark Delacroix's lab here in 2011, 2012.
Kind of from the beginning.
You don't have to start with 6th grade or
We don't have
anything
to
like
start
that.
with
Just
the elementary school. I went to Georgia State University. I got a bachelor's in biology, did all my coursework there, chemistry, biology, and then applied for a job at the VA, actually, back in Atlanta, Georgia. And acquired most of my technical skills through all of my jobs.
in the 12 years that you've been with Professor Delacroix out at CU, tell us what your duties have been.
They've changed a little bit over time. I am a support role for a lot of the people in the lab, for our graduate students, for our postdocs. I help Dr. Delacroix take care of certain protocols that need to be reviewed, things like that. I help train people in the lab, rotation students, graduate students, new postdocs when they come in, take care of administrative things, order all of our supplies, our animals, kind of make sure that the lab is running in compliance with all the university rules and regulations, and every once in a while I do a little science.
You know, in light of that, I guess I should have asked, what does Professor Delacroix do? Is there anything left?
Oh, he writes the grants and gives us all of our ideas so that we can go forth and...
I think we get it. Over the course of time that you've been there at CU with Professor Delacroix, you talked about graduate students, and I want to ask you about that in a moment, but just in case someone doesn't know what this term means, when you say postdoc, what does that mean?
Postdoc is a person that has already received their PhD. So our grad students that are there, that is what they are working towards. They are working towards getting their PhD. Once they do that, they generally will leave the lab and they will go work somewhere else for a few years, and it's called a postdoctoral position.
Now, over the course of that 12 years, how many graduate students do you think you've worked with in Professor Delacroix's labs?
In his lab, 4 to 6 off the top of my head, because they're there for several years.
How many, other than grad
Or
students?
sorry, go ahead.
You were going to make me sound smarter by trying to figure out what I was really asking, right?
I
There's
don't-
something other than a grad student that you supervise or work with. Who is that?
There's the grad students that are with us permanently that are going to do their thesis work there. We have our grad students that are the rotation students, and they're only there for a short period of time. I apologize, there is a difference.
Don't you apologize. That was me. All right, so the grad students that are there for the longer period of time, this is that 4 to 5 year period where they're getting their PhD, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You also have the rotational grad students. How many of them have you worked with over that same 12-year period?
It could easily be between 20 and 30.
All right. Was one of those students back in 2011, 2012, this guy at the table right over here in this, I think it's a light blue shirt?
Yes.
And what do you know is his name?
James Holmes.
When did you meet him?
I met him years ago when he started in our rotation. That rotation generally, I think, runs from the Thanksgiving time to maybe February. So it was Thanksgiving back in that year-ish. Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying to come up with the year.
2011?
2011. Yes.
Okay. Judge, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish Defense Exhibit 8 up onto the monitor here if we could.
Go ahead. That's D-TR-8.
Can you do me a favor, ma'am, and do that voodoo where you make the thing get bigger there? For the one that says Mark Delacqua. No. Close. Good. Is this the lab that we're talking about that you worked in?
Yes.
And this is that second of the 3 lab rotations that you know that these entry-level graduate students go through?
Yes.
There's one other name on here that we haven't met this person yet, Jonathan Murphy. Do you know who that is?
Yes.
Tell us who that is.
Jonathan Murphy at the time was one of the long haul grad students in the lab. He sat right next to me, and he also worked with me and James to help him with his projects.
Is he a doctor now?
He is now a doctor.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. After you meet with your graduate rotational student, and I should ask you this, do you have more than one at a time, or is it usually just one at a time?
It's generally one at a time.
And was that the case when you had the defendant in your lab?
Yes.
Tell me about your interactions with the defendant in terms of the duties that he was going to have to fulfill in the lab and how you helped him accomplish those duties.
I was going to be the person that made the cells for him, whether they were rat cells or mouse cells, brain cells. So I do that. The rotation students aren't allowed to do that. Teach him whatever techniques he was going to need to learn in order to conduct his experiments. That was going to be my main role for him.
Now, you use the term technique. Can you describe for us what you mean by that?
Techniques are just different things that we do in the lab that goes along with certain experiments. We have a technique where we stain cells with antibodies so that we can visualize them under a microscope, or we have a technique where we have to put DNA into the cells so that they will express these particular proteins that we're interested in. There's just different things to help you accomplish the end goal of getting your experiment or answering your question through the experiment.
Is the technique pretty specific? I mean, if you don't do it the right way, you're going to screw it up, that kind of thing?
It can be, yes. There's a little leeway for some of them and little tricks here and there, but for the most part, they're pretty structured, pretty rigid
Now, in your
techniques, if you will.
I'm so sorry to
I'm
step-
sorry.
That's my fault. You don't have to apologize. In your time in this lab, have you come to sort of figure out the kind of rotational grad student that the lab is looking for to be productive for the lab, a possible good fit for the future
Sure.
long-haul graduate student?
Of course.
What is that?
We tend to like students that are a little bit more self-motivated, if you will, don't necessarily need their hand held throughout the entire time, that they're genuinely interested in, what we're doing. They want to learn more. They, are inquisitive. They ask the right questions. They, come and talk to us and just, overall seem to be very interested in what they're doing.
Now, I want to ask you with specific reference to the defendant, what was his affect and demeanor and presentation like when you first met him?
Very quiet, quiet, perhaps laid back is a good word, but just overall very quiet.
Engaging in conversation with you?
Not very much, no. I mean, we would speak about what we needed to talk about, this is the project that you're going to do, or, this is when you need to do it, kind of more giving instructions, and that was kind of it. Does that make sense?
It does. Did you expect that demeanor, that presentation to change over the course of the lab?
I did. A lot of times, even if they're very quiet or shy in the beginning, usually after a few weeks, they get very comfortable or more comfortable, open up a little bit, kind of engage with us a little bit more. So yes, I did, generally expect that would probably change over time.
And did it?
No, it did not.
So that we're clear too, in your exposure to science through this lab and the other stuff that you've described that you've done, I mean, are scientists generally the life of the party?
No, sir. We generally are not.
Okay.
Some more than others. Depends on how high your degree is, too.
Okay. Okay. All right. So over the course of this lab, which you had described running from approximately Thanksgiving-ish up through, did you say the end of February?
I think it's the beginning to mid-February.
Okay.
I think mid-February is when they finally give their rotation talk.
You did not detect any change in demeanor, affect, or presentation in the defendant?
No, sir.
Now, how did that impact the way he got along in the lab?
Can you rephrase that? Or
Yeah, you talked about what you're looking for in
Sure.
a potential good fit. You've talked about sort of the demeanor, this unchanging demeanor that the defendant had. How did that impact his ability, or what you perceive to be his ability to succeed in the experiments and all the other labs and the lab duties and stuff?
It just seemed as though he wasn't interested, because it just didn't really change over time, if that makes sense. There wasn't really a lot of inquisitiveness, a lot of questions, so over time, you just kind of felt that maybe he wasn't interested, which may not necessarily be unusual for grad students. That's why they do several rotations. They may get into a rotation and figure out, this wasn't really as interesting as I thought it was going to be. But we don't want someone in the lab that obviously isn't going to be interested in our stuff.
Or maybe sometimes it's just a personality fit, doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Right. Did you make efforts to try to get him motivated and excited about the lab?
I think so. We try, but at the end of the day, if I realize that someone doesn't want to engage that much, then, we just kind of leave them alone and move on. So, but we tried, or, just normal chit chat. How's your day? Good.
So describe for us, if you would, if he is not engaging you or engaging Professor Delacqua or Jonathan Murphy on, hey, here's what I've done, here's what I needed. If he's not doing that, what do you see him doing in the lab?
Mostly sitting at his desk, headphones on, looking at his laptop.
Now, are there opportunities throughout this period of time in this rotation to get together in a lab setting to discuss the experiments that are being done?
Yes, we have weekly, or every other week we have lab meeting. So that's where the whole group gets together in one room, and we call it a round table. We go around the table and everybody talks about what they're doing, what they have going on, any problems they have. And so it's just a good chance to see what everybody else is doing and get some input.
Was the defendant able to do that?
Yes.
Was your sense from that he understood what he was doing and being expected to do?
Yes.
Now, I want to take us back into the lab then and out of these meetings. In the lab, you said you initially showed him how to do experiments. Did you have to show him more than once how to do the experiments?
I did. I had to show him more than once.
And is that unusual?
It's not out of the range of what you're trying to do when you teach someone. After a certain number of times, you kind of expect them to want to go forth and do it on their own, or be able to do it on their own, and that didn't quite happen.
Now, with what were his facial expressions, if any, when you were showing him, this is how you do this, and again, I don't know what it is, so when you put this thing on the slide and the microscope and stuff, I mean, what was his expression with you?
It was kind of hard to read. Sometimes I just felt like he looked a little confused, or a little blank, if you will. Like I wasn't sure if he was paying attention, if he was interested. That was kind of the general idea that I had. Or
so you couldn't tell from what he was doing in the lab whether he understood it or whether he just didn't care about it?
It was hard to tell.
Okay, and was that, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'm done.
Was that constant throughout the time in the lab?
Yes.
Towards the end of the lab, Was there a different level of effort or output that you detected on the part of the defendant?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That's not necessarily unusual either. They usually do, a final push at the end of the rotation to get some data so they can put together their talk. They have to put together a talk and present it to the department. So yeah, I think that there was a push at the end. He had some experiments that he could look at on the microscope and put all of his information together for his talk.
Now, did you see or remember seeing his final rotational talk?
I did not see his final talk, no.
Were there practice talks in advance of that to help him get ready for that?
Yes.
And what's your perception of how he did on those?
It was a little rough, but it happens. So it's a lot of information to try to take in over an 8 to 10 week period. Sometimes it's not put together very well, and they're still pretty new at doing this, so it can be a little rough around the edges, if you will.
And was that the case here with the defendant?
Yes.
A couple other things. He was never not nice. Is that
Never
fair?
not. Yes, that's fair.
How would you describe him otherwise? I mean, was he polite?
He was polite. I mean, he wasn't rude. Wasn't, just, it's the best way I could put it. He wasn't not nice. If you said hi, he said hi back, Good morning, how was your day? Good.
Anything stick out in your mind about his dress or his hygiene or anything that was different than any of the other grad students?
No, it's pretty standard.
When the rotation ends, how does it end between you guys?
For the most part, they do their talk, and I think they get their grade a day or two later, and then it's just kind of done. They move on. So we usually say bye, good luck. That's it.
I'm sorry, was that the case here?
I don't remember saying goodbye or I watched him walk out of the lab, and that was that. Because they generally start their next rotation right after the previous one is done. So I don't remember, honestly.
At any time during the lab, did you perceive that the defendant had a passion or enthusiasm for what he was doing?
No.
And I think this question is coming, but during the time that you were with him in that lab, did you ever believe that he was detached from reality?
No, sir.
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Hicks?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is that on? Can you hear me fine?
I can.
Excellent. I just have a few questions for you, and then you will be done.
Okay.
You indicated when you were looking at the defense exhibit, that chart, that Jonathan Murphy was also in the lab.
Yes, ma'am.
Was one of the other of you working more with Mr. Holmes, or both working with him, or?
We were both working with him. I think John had a little bit more to do with him than I did. I think the project that John was helping him with was more involved than what I was helping him with.
Okay. I want to just unpack and have you describe a little bit more about your interaction with Mr. Holmes in the lab, so that's what I'm going to start with.
Okay.
All right. I know you've said he was very quiet.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is it fair to say you can't even really remember many conversations you even had with him?
That's fair, yes.
Okay. And it seemed to you that he didn't really want to interact with people much. Is that fair?
That's fair, correct.
Okay. I also understand that you've had a number of students in the many years you've been in the lab,
Yes.
and that many students will come in and they do kind of tend to talk about their projects. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. They want to talk about the details of their work.
Yes.
They kind of sometimes even want to just tell you everything that they know.
Oh, yes, they do.
Okay. Now, Mr. Holmes was not like that at all.
No, ma'am.
In fact, kind of really the opposite of that. Is that fair to say?
That is fair.
Okay. And I think that you've also sort of described that he was really not able to engage. Is that fair?
I'm not necessarily sure that he wasn't able. More, it was my impression he just didn't want to.
Okay. And so you bring up a very good point, because what you were able to see was sort of his behavior in the lab, but you never really asked him why he was behaving a certain way.
No, ma'am.
Okay. And he never expressed to you things verbally like, I'm not interested in this lab or anything like that.
No, he did not.
So your characterizations of his behavior were really what you inferred from that behavior. Is that fair?
Fair.
Okay. I recognize that you said that you helped Mr. Holmes with some of the preparation work and some of the techniques in the lab, right?
Yes.
It's fair to say, though, that really over that whole period of time, it wasn't a lot of interaction with you directly with Mr. Holmes.
Not a lot. I mean, there were daily interactions because he was in the lab every day.
And you were in the lab every
And
day.
I was in the lab every day. So there would be a portion of the day, be it small. Sometimes, you have this going on, or these cells are this particular age, this needs to be done today. And then I would move on and go do some of the other things I had to take care of.
All of that interaction really focused on stuff that was going on as far as work in the lab. Is that right?
Yes.
You did not have conversations with him really about his life outside of the lab?
No.
No interactions with him on any sort of social level?
No.
Okay. I also understand that on the occasions that you did talk to him, it was very common for him to respond with short one-word, yep, nope.
Yes, ma'am.
answers.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I think other words you would use to describe him would be shy. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Introverted, fair?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I'm just checking my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything, so be a little bit patient with me. I appreciate it.
No problem.
You were asked on direct, I'm sorry, I get a little thirsty, about how Mr. Holmes presented. It's fair to say that he presented, a way to describe that would be flat.
Flat.
Okay. That he did not have a lot of eye contact with you, correct?
Correct.
That I think you said normally in other people you've interacted with, they'll have facial expressions when they're speaking, but with Mr. Holmes, there was really not much of that.
That's correct.
Well, you talked a little bit about the end of lab presentation. Now, when students, first-year rotation students, are coming into a lab and sort of getting to the end of the lab and having to prepare that presentation, am I correct that other people in the lab will assist the first-year rotation students in doing that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you help prepare that presentation?
No, I did not.
And that wouldn't be something normally within your multitude of job duties?
That is not on my list of things to do. No, I never give these kinds of presentations, so I don't help out with that. The other grad students and postdocs and Mark, Dr. Delacqua, in the lab, they help out with that.
Okay. So help kind of put together the presentations, pick the slides.
Pick the slides, arrange the data so that it makes a nice story, if you will.
Okay. You talked about, well, you could tell from your interactions with James Holmes that he was not dumb, right?
Correct. Oh, correct.
He was a smart student.
I thought so. Yes, I think so.
Okay. But yet, you felt that there were things in the lab that you thought he should get, but he didn't really get.
It didn't seem to me as though he was getting it.
Okay. And I think that you've indicated you've had to explain to him some things more than once. Fair to say?
Fair to say.
More times than you thought you maybe should have had to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And some of those things were kind of basic stuff at that point, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I think you've said with some of the kind of the hands-on experiments, that when you would kind of explain things again, sometimes it was like he was doing it for the very first time.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you talked about getting together at these end of the week, or I think maybe bi-weekly lab meetings?
Weekly lab meetings or every other week, yes.
In those meetings, he was able to discuss the techniques, but it was just the implementation on a physical level that was part of the dilemma. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay.
More discussing what the project was or what needed to be done or what he was hoping to find out of it, yes.
I just have, I think, a couple more questions for you. Let me just make sure I'm getting everything, so let me flip through my notes. Oh, right. You said scientists are not always the life of the party.
Not so much.
Okay. So it didn't surprise you to have a student rotate through your lab that was quiet. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, that's fair. No, that didn't surprise me at all.
Okay. But it did surprise you a little bit with Mr. Holmes that quiet, sort of introverted, introversion, I guess is better, didn't change over time.
That did surprise me a little bit, yes.
Like you didn't ever get to know him better.
Correct.
Okay. Now, last, I understand that you saw some photos of Mr. Holmes in the paper a couple days after the shootings.
Yes, ma'am.
When he was in court?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe that's Defense Exhibit 8?
I think it's 7.
7? Sorry, we're learning. Well, let me ask you this, Ms. Gibson.
Sure.
You recall seeing those photos of Mr. Holmes in court, and it was just a couple days after the shooting, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when you saw that, I think a way that you've described his eyes is kind of bug-eyed.
Yes.
Is that an expression that you see up here?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that's an expression I think that you had seen occasionally with Mr. Holmes while he was in the lab. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's an expression that you saw with him when he appeared confused.
I thought so, yes.
Okay. Let me check with my colleagues, and maybe I'm done.
Okay.
I don't have any further questions. We can take that down. Thank you.
Mr. Bruckler, do you have any redirect? Okay.
Ma'am, could you throw that back up there for me?
Make sure you turn your mic on, please.
Ma'am, were these the pictures that you referred to when you had mentioned in the past that you had seen him looking somewhat confused like that in the lab? Were these those pictures or different pictures?
Oh, I think it was probably these or whatever they had put up,
Based
on TV or in the paper.
Yeah.
Keep doing that, I'm sorry.
No, it's me. I'm sorry. Can you look up here and see if there's one that's closest to the one that you would say when you explain something to him and you attribute that to confusion? Which one of those?
Maybe the second from the left, I'm sorry.
Second from the left is great. I won't even make you use the stick because I think we can
Okay.
see that. Second from left. And that's the look that you saw in the lab when he seemed to not get what was going on?
Something similar to it, yes, I thought.
You're not
Yeah.
referring to the other ones, you're referring to that one.
To that one.
Thank you. You said you had daily interactions with him, is that right?
Yes.
Ms. Higgs asked you about the fact that this was not the first person that you'd had in the lab who was shy or even introverted.
Correct.
Is he the kind of person that if you told him what to do, and as you described previously, held his hand to get something done, he could do it?
He would do it.
If it was something that was left to his own motivation or initiative, would he get it done?
No, I don't think so. It's hard to remember, I am sorry, but it was more of having to hold his hand or remind him that this needed to be done so that the work could get done.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any recross?
No, thank you.
All right, it looks like the jury has some questions for you, so give us a moment, please.
Of course.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Would counsel please approach? Actually, counsel, approach again on that scheduling issue, please. All right, Ms. Gibson, the jury has submitted some questions that they would like me to ask you. I have found, based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, that most of these questions are appropriate. The first question is, do you know what he was looking at on his laptop?
No, I did not.
The next question is, when you refer to unengaging, are you referring to not feeling that he was wanting to engage others in the lab, or just not really engaging toward the lab work? Like not showing an interest in project details, like not interested toward the work itself, if you know. And if you want me to repeat it, I can repeat it.
I felt as though he didn't want to engage with us, in general, or the work.
The next question is, can you explain the defendant's facial features and hand gestures?
In reference to what, sir?
Now, let me read the next question, and perhaps this gives you context. Did he ever make odd gestures that didn't match his conversation?
Not that I remember.
Any follow-up questions based on those questions, Mr. Brockler?
No, sir, thank you.
Any follow-up questions based on those questions, Ms. Higgs?
No, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be released from her subpoena.
You may, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
There is not.
Okay. All right, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, members of the jury, it's close to 5, and so what I'm going to do is adjourn a little early today. I'm sure none of you objects to that. One of you specifically say no objection. I've been told that you're now asking for specific types of snacks, and so I can tell you're getting very comfortable. All right, let me give you the advisements before you go home today, since we have a few minutes. Number 1, please do not discuss any aspect of the case with each other through any means. You're free to talk to each other, but not about the case. Number 2, in addition to not being able to discuss the case with each other, you may not communicate about the case with anyone else through any means. That includes your spouse or significant other. All you can tell people is that you're on a jury in a trial in Arapahoe County that is expected to end in August or September. Number 3, please do not talk with any witnesses, parties, or attorneys about anything, whether related to the case or not. Number 4, to make sure that witnesses, parties, and attorneys do not talk to you, it is imperative that you wear your juror badge whenever you're on the courthouse premises, and that it is visible to everyone around you. Your juror badge will also reduce the risk that people will talk about the case in your presence. If you hear anyone talking about the case, please remove yourself from that location immediately. In the event that despite your best efforts, you hear something about the case, please let my staff know that you need to talk to me. And all you have to do and all you should do is just say that you want to talk to me. You should not indicate what it is about. Number 5, please do not talk to any members of the media about anything until the case is completed. Number 6, you must not read, view, or listen to any news or media reports that may refer to the case. Because there's media coverage of this trial, please be particularly vigilant while listening to the radio, watching TV, reading the newspaper, and using the internet or any other electronic device, You cannot visit, number 7, you cannot visit any locations mentioned in the case or conduct your own investigation outside the courtroom. That includes consulting outside references such as scientific books or legal books or religious books. Number 8, you cannot start forming any opinions about the case until I tell you that you can start deliberating. You must keep an open mind throughout the trial. Number 9, neither sympathy nor prejudice for the prosecution or the defendant may affect any of your decisions in this case. All of those advisements are mandatory and they apply to each and every one of you. One housekeeping matter. Tomorrow we're going to stop at 4:30 because Juror 872 has an appointment to get the final work done on her tooth. And so you can plan accordingly. So tomorrow you can plan on getting an early start on the weekend, about 30 minutes worth of an early start. It's not a whole lot, but it's a little bit, all right? Okay, folks, have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you. The record should reflect that the jury has now exited the courtroom. Everyone may be seated. Is there anything that we need to talk about on behalf of the prosecution at this time, Mr. Brockler? Turn on your mic, please. Or go ahead.
Earlier, Your Honor, prior to you taking over this case, Judge Sylvester had entered an order regarding a subpoena duces taken that we had sought for some records. This is prior to the defendant entering a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. And as part of that order, and I can try to come up with a copy of it that isn't marked up, the court excluded from the records we were able to obtain from CU certain letters of recommendation that have now been referenced with several of the professors that have given testimony. I'd ask the court at this point to revisit that order, and in light of the entry of the plea of NGRI and the conduct of the trial thus far, amend that order to allow us to have those letters of recommendation.
Is the only thing you're interested in the letters of recommendation?
Your Honor, those are the things I know we're absolutely missing. The other things that were excluded in that order, I don't know what they are, but if the court's asking if I had my druthers, I want everything that was previously excluded by the court from us having it for whatever confidential reasons that were placed in there in light of the plea.
And what order is that? Do you know? I don't need a copy of it. I just need to know what order number it is.
It's dated August 27th of 2011, 12.
August 27, 2012, was it labeled as C something?
Your Honor, Ms. Tisha McGuire is going to look that up. I apologize for not having that at my fingertips.
Okay.
classified. If the court would prefer, I can chase down this information I should have available, and then first thing tomorrow morning we can bring it up to the court.
Okay, that'd be great. All right, is there anything else on behalf of the people before I turn it to the defense and see if they have anything? All right, anything from the defense or any position that you want to take on the last request?
No, not at this time.
Okay. All right, thank you. The court will be in recess. I'll see you tomorrow.